Welcome back, everyone, to the Share Your Why podcast. Have a fantastic guest today, my good friend, Lewis Sheats. Lewis, how are you?
Great. How are you, Thomas?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Lewis and I are going to have a great conversation all about customer discovery. For all of my entrepreneurs out there who are listening, this one should be really applicable for you. And for everybody else, honestly, I found that customer discovery is something that we can apply in a lot of different areas in life. First met Lewis actually when I came to NC State. And as a freshman, I remember Googling like who's in charge of entrepreneurship at NC State. And I found Lewis's name online, gave him a call, and he was nice enough to meet with me. That kind of kickstarted a lot of different things where I got to meet all of these fantastic people at NC State within the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm really grateful for that. A little bit more about Lewis for all of you. Sheats is an entrepreneur and educator. He has identified and developed several unique new ventures and serves as the assistant vice provost for entrepreneurship and the executive director of the NC State Entrepreneurship Clinic, an initiative which exposes students to experiential learning and embeds them in the entrepreneurship community to develop as entrepreneurial thinkers. As a faculty member of the NC State Poole College of Management, he is devoted to preparing the next generation of entrepreneurs. So, Lewis, we'd love to hand it over to you just to give you a chance to share your story. We'd love to hear the whole thing.
I consider myself an entrepreneur and a professor in two parallel lives, essentially. So I went to NC State as an undergrad to be an engineer. I was really good in math and calculus, but thermodynamics sort of told me I didn't want to be an engineer anymore. So I eventually ended up in the business school and graduated with a finance degree from State. It actually took me 10 years to graduate from undergrad because of a lot of different things that happened. I met a wonderful person. We got married, we had a kid, and we were pretty young. So at 19 years old, I immediately got a full-time job at Rex Hospital. For the rest of my time as a student, I worked full-time at least 40 hours a week and then went to class at night or in the afternoons to try to get that degree. I was making a little bit over minimum wage and realized that that was not sustainable in terms of raising a family. And I was in a marketing class, but it was taught by a professor that was more of an entrepreneur type professor. And he made a comment as an entrepreneur, finding your niche and then filling that niche. It just resonated for me to start to look for something different, like find what was I going to be really good at. I worked second shift at Rex in the storeroom and then the operating room handling supplies. And I remember just walking at night through the hallways and sort of repeating that in my head, like, what's your niche? Which similar to Tell Your Why, I needed to start a business just mainly to survive. I saw an opportunity to start a courier business because of this need at the hospital for delivering supplies from the prom vendor to the operating room every day. So I got a minivan, like let's pull off this courier business thing and I'll make millions of dollars and be successful. It didn't quite happen like that. The first day we had a delivery was September 30th, 1996, and I was late for the delivery by about an hour and a half. Luckily, the person that had hired me for the delivery was a little forgiving and gave me another shot. You know, in the beginning, it was really bad. I didn't really know what we were doing. I didn't understand what customer discovery was. I didn't understand what planning for the company. I didn't understand financial modeling. I just knew I needed to do something to somebody pay me more than what I was getting paid before. Went broke essentially, but just continued to push through it. About a year into it, I got really lucky. Got this huge account that took us from the whole business was making $2,000 a month to $27,000 a month with this one contract. So it just changed the whole trajectory. We all of a sudden had cash. We could hire people. My wife and I didn't have to do all the deliveries. We could start building. It was then that I thought that that was the niche. This new customer was in the pharmacy warehouse space and we were delivering medicines to nursing homes, and I'd never heard of that. And I thought, all right, cool, this is my niche. Then it hit me that, you know, I created a really successful company, but I also created a really crappy job for myself. It was not the things I enjoyed, the build, the excitement of what was going to happen next. It was just a rut that I'd gotten into. So I decided to take a year off and sort of figure out what I wanted to do next. I was still pretty young, hired my replacement, and got a call from that old professor that had said, find your niche. By then he was teaching an entrepreneurship class and asked me to come co-teach it with him. And I thought, why not? 3 days a week, an hour. What else am I going to do for the next year? So I fell in love with that aspect of being in the classroom. I loved being around students that were living in that ideation phase. I was volunteering for the first couple of years, co-teaching a class, and then I started teaching a class, and then it became 2 classes, it became 3 classes, and eventually an entire program got built. And I've taught every class in pool that's has to do with entrepreneurship. And at the same time, I still ran this parallel life as an entrepreneur. We sold that first business a few years later, started another company in the bakery business, drugs to cookies. It was a obvious linear path. And then we went into the GPS space, then analytics and reporting, and now I have a wine shop. That parallel life has always been bled into the classroom to make sure that the practical components of entrepreneurship and life are in the classroom. It's not completely theoretical, and it's a blend of both so that students come out of that with true experience and not just classroom experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. One thing I find really interesting is the two parallel lives you're talking about, always being the entrepreneur, but also always being the teacher. How hard has that been to manage?
A lot of people say your schedule's too busy or you got too many things that you're focused on. And I actually don't think my schedule is very busy. It seems like I have a lot of extra time. Part of the reason I think is because they mesh so well. We go into the classroom and I'm working with students on their concepts. I'm learning as well, and I'm able to take that into a new venture outside of that. That goes across all the time that I can spend with our alumni that are not in the classroom anymore. Those things still come from that. I get and understand the reasoning for compartmentalizing some things, but I like the bleed because it helps both sides of that little parallel life that I live.
I'd love to hear from your perspective, like customer discovery. When were you first exposed to it? How has it kind of evolved over time, just in your perception of it?
I had no idea when I first heard the terminology or
Mhm.
started recognizing what it was, but looking back on it, we've always done that, right? And it's just different degrees of how you do it and then what you learn from it. So if I go back to that first company we started, the basis of it was just a courier business. I basically lived in customer discovery for 4 years, someone that worked at the hospital, and recognized what the pain points were. What I didn't do back then was go beyond that one data point. And I didn't validate that it really existed anywhere else and how they were solving it. That was a dumb mistake. And that's sort of why I teach now, so you don't make those mistakes as students. Fast forward, you go all the way to the last business where we launched the wine shop. We literally would stand on the corner and survey people walking near the where we're going to have it to ask them questions and try to get a wider scope of who that customer was going to be, and then build the concept around what feedback we were getting. We even did that before it was a wine shop because we knew that there was a gap in the marketplace in downtown Raleigh for something, and we had a space that we wanted to take advantage of. We didn't know what it was. So that customer discovery actually led us to the wine shop, but bagels and wine came to the final two. And
Oh, wow.
eventually it was wine won out because of margins and hours. And, I like wine better than bagels probably. So that's why the customer
Right.
discovery is so important.
So you actually had the space first, and then you had to go out and do surveying to figure out what makes the most sense to go into it.
I had fallen in love with this space a long time ago, and that's not a good business model, right? You don't just fall in love with the space. You need to come up with a concept. So I'd basically been following this space for 10 or 12 years. And when it came available, it was a really good timing for us. Reached out to the owner of the building and said, "Hey, I'd like that space." And he goes, "What do you want to put in it?" And I said, "I don't know." And I said, "I just want it." And he said, "Well, come back with an idea of what you want to put in it, and then we'll talk." And that's where we started down this path of like, what was the gap that was missing in downtown Raleigh, and how could we fill that gap?
Did you find out about customer discovery just through your own individual research?
That component of it came from studying what to teach and how to teach it better. I didn't need a definition of customer discovery. I just knew you had to go talk to the customer. And I knew I needed to get that information to better build what they wanted. I just didn't know we were calling it customer discovery. I can be a little fast moving, a little ambiguous when it comes to processes sometimes, which is one of my downfalls, but also one of my strengths because it'll make me move versus be stagnant. I needed to make sure I was teaching correctly what the researchers had found to be appropriate. And then again, this is the whole purpose of the program, is like bringing the practical component into the theoretical and really sharing the stories of how do you really do it.
You mentioned that you were about to go into this new phase of customer discovery. I'd love to hear maybe if you could just like give a concrete example. What are kind of the steps and the tactics you use as you go through the process of figuring out what people want?
The wine shop that we launched is called Short Walk. It's downtown Raleigh. It's 2.5 years old now. So we're ready to expand, and we're looking at 3 different locations. Location's going to be key. You got to put it where where that customer base is, you've got to find a gap, a niche that you can plug this that nobody's really hitting. You couldn't put this beside Harris Teeter or Whole Foods or Total Wine. Wouldn't make any sense. They're going to be able to beat us in price and volume. Our approach is first look at the secondary data that exists out there. So we're looking for specific demographics, and then we're looking at density, because we're trying to find that dense space, like downtown Raleigh, for example. We already have a lot of information of who our customer is and what they look like, generalized sense, based on the last 2.5 years. Now we take that secondary data and use that to find the niches. But then you got to go to the next component and really talk to them, right? So our next phase is to start asking questions and talking to the people that live in these dense spaces that we've identified as potential locations. How you do that is a little different, especially now with COVID. It's not like I can just, stand on the corner and talk to people. Can't always understand my good Southern slang through a mask, but we can still do it through social media like Facebook groups. We can do it through surveys. We can do it through a network effect. Maybe you live in one of these dense spaces and I could get connected to you. I could ask you through Zoom or through a phone call or through an email a couple of questions that are key for me to understand you as a customer, and then ask for you to introduce me to 2 of your neighbors, and then use that network effect to then build that data that I'm trying to collect on the customer discovery. So the biggest takeaway is you just have to do it, right? Most people just skip it. So we'll go through those steps at least 3 times to truly identify which one is the right spot next, right? That we might end up in all 3 eventually, but we're trying to mitigate risk. So which one do we end up in next? Other factors going to come into play. You got to think about, all right, what are the costs? What are the obstacles? So potential customers, but customer discovery should be driving that.
If you'd be willing to share, like, what are a couple examples of questions that you would ask, like during a customer interview like that?
I try not to go into a Q&A session. I really want to talk to somebody and get the conversation going. And then I know I can drop the questions in without it feeling like I'm just surveying them, right? I might say, well, Thomas, do you drink wine? Where do you buy your wine? I buy wine from Short Walk, but I normally buy wine from Food Line because it's just easier and convenient because I'm there. I hear that a lot. People buy based on convenience. When you're at Food Line, what makes you buy the wine that you buy? Are you buying something you've had before, or do you buy because it's a cool label or price point? What's the most memorable bottle you bought in the last couple of months? All of a sudden, we get in a conversation. If I know all those things, and if I find enough of that information that matches other people that are like you in that demographic, then I can start building based on that.
I noticed that all the questions you were saying there were very present state. That's definitely something I found from my research, is like not asking people, what would you do? It's just like, hey, what are you doing now, or what have you done? How do you frame that conversation? Whether you tell people exactly what sort of solution you're already thinking about, or whether you kind of hold back and just ask them questions and focus on that. I'm really curious your take.
It depends on the context, right? If I just walked up to somebody on the street and said, hey, what kind of wine you like? They're going to look at me funny. And if the context is completely disconnect, then you do have to preface it. Hey, I'm looking for information on a potential new store. I might not say a wine store. I say, we're looking at a potential new store in downtown Raleigh and love to get some information from you to see if it might be a good fit. Probably wouldn't get to a wine question until 3 or 4 questions in. So I don't get them to lean their answers towards that. And I wouldn't necessarily give the concept away at all unless I'm looking for feedback on the concept. So in a quick on the street type survey interview, I might not actually get to the concept. I might give them a takeaway, right? Hey, we're thinking about opening the wine shop. Thanks for helping us use this coupon when we open up. But most of the time, I'm not going to give the concept away because I don't want to influence their answers. If I were asking you questions, I'm not going to start with what's your favorite wine. What I should have really been hoping to get from you is a wine the right answer? If you're walking on the street, I might ask you like, hey, do you live downtown? Did you drive to downtown? Did you walk here? What's your favorite shop downtown when you're walking around? I can pull some good information from that, right? You're looking for convenience or price. There's something driving that, or it's just really close. We can go through these questions without tipping what the concept is to make sure that we're truly getting unbiased information from the.
Would you be open to the idea of having a solid amount of the people that you talk to for these conversations be friends of yours? Or would you want it to only be people that you didn't know previously?
It's okay to start with your friends, right? At least you can get the conversations going and you can practice the questions. But you have to realize that your friends aren't necessarily going to be honest. Most people do not like confrontation. So if I really don't like your concept, I might say, yeah, that's sort of cool. I'm not going to give you a lot of information to really let you know it's a good or bad idea. If you have a hard time or you're not comfortable in that situation, you don't know how to reach that next person, use your friends and family to do that. Use the reach and technology that you have available, right? Social media is one of the best things that we've ever come up with in terms of for customer discovery because it gives so much reach and access. You can get tons of data that way, and it's easy to sort of weed out the bad and the good.
I love that idea of asking your friends to introduce you to someone else you don't know. I've heard a lot of numbers of like, hey, if more than 50% after 20 conversations, if more than 50% of them are validating, then you're good to go. Should you be checking some of that demographic data before you talk to somebody? Because I feel like that would heavily influence the percentage that said yes or no.
There are going to be some check marks that have to happen for it to be valid, right? So the wine shop's actually a pretty good one because we have a legal limit of when you can drink. You got to be cognizant of that. But what you don't want to do is, I need you to answer these 6 questions before I can have a conversation with you, because then conversations don't naturally happen that way. I wouldn't ever say it's a complete loss because you still got something out of it. And that is the importance of customer discovery, is you can't go into it knowing the answers. You have to continually go through the discovery process.
If you're halfway through a conversation, let's say with the wine shop example, right? Somebody says like, oh no, I've never bought wine from a specialty store. I always just get it from the grocery store. What is your immediate reaction to that? I mean, do you continue the conversation? Do you just kind of say, hey, thanks for spending time,
Definitely need to find out more, right? Because I want to know why they've never bought it from a specialty store, right? Is it intimidating? Is it that there's not one nearby? Is it the perception that it costs too much? When we started the wine shop, we got a lot of feedback on wine is intimidating, right? And it can be, right? So one of the things that we learned from that was, all right, we're going to make sure that the people that work in the wine shop, one, are going to be extremely friendly. We're going to try to take the intimidation factor away by providing knowledge to them either through the person in the wine shop or through the website or through the cards that are on the wine. And we're going to put it in terms that would be relatable to anybody, right? So instead of talking about the aromas and the bouquet of wine, talk about this is really good with Eastern North Carolina barbecue. So the intimidation factor starts to go away. You got to keep digging to understand why people answer the way they do, and then use that information to help you build that concept or market to them, or those components.
Are you even mentally like trying to think like, oh, is this somebody who would or would not, be potentially swayable during the conversation? Or do you kind of try and block that out?
You cannot be everything to everybody. When we first started the courier business, we literally printed on our business cards, anything, anytime, anywhere. It's the worst business plan you possibly can have, right?
I can relate to that.
Yeah. And it was a huge mistake, but also something I learned from and carried on forever after that. It's okay to not solve everybody's problems, but you really want to be able to solve your customer's problems better than anybody else. Define who your customer is.
What are the things that you still feel like you struggle with? Like, what are the parts that are still pretty hard even after all that time?
Probably the biggest thing is that I still skip some steps. I just assume I know because I have done a lot that I'll just skip some steps, and it comes back to bite me sometimes.
I appreciate you sharing. How do you kind of think about your why or your purpose, especially since you're this multi-passionate person who loves entrepreneurship and loves teaching and being around other people?
Like, you are part of the why, you personally, because you're a former student, and that really drives me. I love the impact students have on me and whatever impact I can have on them, but the impact they have on me is so freaking powerful that it just motivates me and keeps me going on a day-to-day basis. It is the interactions, the conversations, the energy, almost the vicarious living. I know what you're going through now and trying to build. I've been there, and I can feel that energy as you're going through it. And I love being able to do that over and over again with students inside the classroom and outside the classroom. My favorite part is before or after class, when you really are able to talk to students and see how they're thinking and learn from them. As a institution like NC State, we should be really focused on how do we create the best of the best people, and some of them are going to be the best chemists, and some are going to be the best engineers, and some are going to be the best design students, and some are going to be the best entrepreneurs. But overall, like, how do we create the best of the best people? And that really drives me. Like, how do we truly make sure that everybody that comes through those halls or sits in those classes really understands that there's this huge support network that really cares for them to be the best academically and personally and outside the walls of NC State, that they are the best.
Powerful story. I usually ask the question like, what's one big piece of advice? I really value your feedback on the challenge teams because a lot of it's also based on inspiration from the e-clinics, not just like talking about something, it's actually going out and doing it. Like, what's your take on it as an educator looking at that, as an entrepreneur looking at that? Where do you think it could go? What sort of feedback do you have? I'd love to hear.
Accountability works, right? And you see it in like gym challenges and no smoking challenges, like health stuff. We've seen that happen over and over again. But if you think about entrepreneurship or life, there's some times when it can be really lonely, and that loneliness can drive inaction, right? Because you either don't know what question to ask, or you don't know who to ask, or you don't know what the next step is. And if you don't have yourself surrounded by people that you can trust and be accountable to, you just sort of spin in place. If you have this support group or this accountability group, it changes your perception. Putting it out there sort of forces the hand to like, I've got to be accountable to my words and move forward. My thing is, embrace ambiguity, because nobody knows all the paths and the plans, but you have to do something, right? You can't just talk about it, you got to do something. And that's where that action comes into play.
Are there any potential hurdles you see in the way, maybe things I haven't foreseen yet, or just any advice for me you have, just given the experience, all the experiences that you've had?
Never stop listening. We get so excited about our baby, our entrepreneurial kid, our concept. We end up just building versus listening. And you got to be able to do both. It goes back to your accountability teams, but it's also important when you have advisors and mentors that you can trust, that will kick you back in line if they see that you stop listening.
Where can people go if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to learn more? What would you kind of tell them if they're interested in some of this entrepreneurship stuff?
I'm all over ncsu.edu. Type in Sheats. I'm so open to meet with young entrepreneurs, whether it be for coffee or beer or Zoom, 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. It is no joke. I'm willing to do that.
Well, Lewis, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate it.